Turns out he's a major cinephile. They don't watch enough movies! It's a very simple formula! And here we go. Come one and come all to Knick Knack Goes to the Movies, the one-stop shop for all things movie, TV, and pop culture. After a few superhero episodes, and many more in the near future, I felt it was time once again to dive into something a little spookier. What in question might seem a bit niche, but having seen a few of these recently, I want to talk about horror movies that happen at carnivals, fairs, something of that ilk. Think like the Six Flags Fright Fest. I can't say I've actually ever been to one of those, but imagine going to one of these fun things for rides, some scares, maybe some hot dogs or whatever. But instead, you get genuine terror and you may not even make it out alive. Wow. Wild, right? Well, in my recent hunting for a new scare, I saw not one, not two, but 3 movies just like this. Bloodfest, Hellfest, I know they sound very derivative, and the Funhouse Massacre seem to all have this setting, but take slightly different directions, with the assignment. I know many scary movies have a carnival or fair. It Chapter 2 had a side story at one of these, but these movies have a main focus in these settings. Some go for scares, some go for meta-analysis, not unlike the Scream franchise, but all are a fun time. So strap in as we dive into 3 frightful fun films and think of a different time when going to an amusement park with tons of people didn't seem like the scariest thing out there. Uh-oh. People. Damn you, COVID-19. Let's kick things off with the Funhouse Massacre on Amazon Prime. Of the 3 movies being talked about here, right now that you're listening to, this is the only one I have never seen. This is also the only one that I can't say I really know anyone in it from their other works. I have obviously heard of Robert Englund, the original Freddy, even though the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise still hasn't really spoken to me just yet. Y'all know with the Freddy vs. Jason being very low on my list, if not the lowest on my list of the Friday the 13th films. But that whole Nightmare franchise is on HBO Max, so sometime. I gotta imagine it is close if I'm already watching or starting the Exorcist franchise, something I never thought I would want to do. This movie, though, already is the strangest of the lot, with the main plot being a ton of killers are freed and brought to a theme park that has their specific styles of killing, so they can run about amucking and do the dirty deed and have a grand old time doing it. I'm not gonna lie. This movie starts with a brief and incredibly generic who's who of a killer clown, taxidermy guy, religious zealot, a cannibal cook, and a dentist? The dentist one is the strangest somehow. This is like a cheesy, bad movie. His character's name is Dr. Suave, and Animal the Cannibal, which is an awful riff on Hannibal the Cannibal from the very, very good, you could go, Silence of the Lambs, the whole franchise, the TV show Hannibal. Most likely that's not going to be touched in the Clarice CBS show, but we'll talk about that once we see a little more. I want the full body of work before we talk about Clarice. But you know what you're getting with the movie called Funhouse Massacre. To be sure. We get so quickly introduced to the tropes and not the characters. I don't really care about anyone. The Funhouse Massacre does have this dentist guy that the more I talk about and the more I watch it, I was like really curious about. Because it kind of reminds me of Little Shop of Horrors, like the I Am Your Dentist guy, played by Steve Martin. I mean, his vignette was taking something about the size of like a jackhammer and doing air quote dentist work. I want to even say air quotes so you were very clear on what I meant. Who goes to the dentist appointment? This was the biggest question I had through the whole movie. In the middle of nowhere with one person working. It defies logic. How many people go to a dentist where there's a practice or a few people or even just a secretary? And I had so many questions of how we got there. But still, somehow this is one of my favorite parts of this movie. The non-serial killer people are once again briefly met, and I really don't care about anyone here either, once again. This Ocean's 13 Freddy vs. Jason level of bad horror is like a really bad setup for a really bad movie. There is something kind of funny about the park actors being taken out by the real serial killer counterparts, and the gore at moments is good, a bit over the top gross, but good enough nonetheless. This really is the inmates take over the asylum, but unsuspecting folks are walking into this literal death trap. I think my biggest issue / question with this movie, beside the dentist thing, is just how most of the event staff is still working, the main 6 character actors are replaced by real serial killers, and the boss is missing. In the other movies, the setup makes a bit more sense, which is saying something. One locks everyone in the whole park, and the whole staff is in on it killing people. The other is one killer is hidden among the whole park staff as a random guy. This half and half, especially with so many bigger figures at the top, it kind of makes sense, but only kind of at best. But having the parkgoers be a part of all the violence and think it's just part of the act is a trope that will never get old, especially in this niche genre. Leaving all the dead parkgoers' bodies lying there and not really being suspicious at all, it's a pretty wild time. Like, thank goodness they lock everyone in, because otherwise you'd think everyone would just leave, especially because you only got 6 people to worry about. But something about it being not one and not all, but something in between just doesn't feel the same. This is clearly not trying to be a scary movie, more so a bit gross and very dumb. The people who made it might say funny. I would say dumb. The thing about this movie is unless you're going alone or with one more person, eventually you may wonder where your group keeps disappearing to, or might recognize a few of the dead bodies just lying around. They do an okay job with the kills as they go, but this movie, it's like barely watchable. There's a cop subplot that's super glossed over, like everything in this movie. It's barely a thing. They do the whole one is the dumb cop of the pair trying to save the day. Fine, I mean, it's better than that one Halloween movie with the 2 cops and the like bum, 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 circus music, and I think that's Halloween 5. But, this is the route they went with it, which is what it is. Just a dumb movie. Also, the other thing that really bugged me about this movie is I felt like early on they teased this fence being an electric fence. Like the whole time it was mentioned, you're seeing signs saying electric fence over it, but it's never actually used. It's the whole like Chekhov's gun. If you see a gun, it's going to be used. If you talk about an electric fence and you have signs for the electric fence the whole time, you gotta imagine it would be useful or even existing at some point. The amount of time people touched this fence and nothing happened, it's wild. Like, either they forgot about it or it just didn't matter. I don't know. That also bugged me in this movie. There is a fun reveal, or would have been a fun reveal had been developed more, of the main cop being related to the evil preacher guy, but it's so short-lived and not developed that once again, like the rest of the movie, it really doesn't matter at all. Even though they do have not 1 but 2 fun fake-out kills at the very end, right as someone does a "I can't believe I made it," and then they don't make it line, or the final girl rides away in the ambulance, but surprise, surprise, the killer's in there too wearing a different face. Cool, neat moments for sure, but they just happen right at the end, and no matter what, it's just a bad movie. And, unfortunately, we're off to a bad start. I feel like I don't talk about a lot of bad movies I watch, but this was a bad movie. Next up, we got Bloodfest, also on Amazon Prime. And it combines the scares of real killers based on horror genres and makes it the entire premise of a park. Everyone is in on it, and it leans hard into horror meta humor as well as just ridiculousness. 2 of our leads should be known to most of our listeners. Robbie K, Peter Pan from Once Upon a Time, who is the villain in that version. Spoiler alert for a show that has been done for quite some time on ABC. As well as one of the main leads from the Heroes Reborn series, which has a bad rep but really missed out on not having Zachary Quinto, Milo Ventimiglia, and Hayden Panettiere. And all of our superhero listeners should know about Jacob Batalon as Spider-Man's best friend in the MCU, Ned. Speaking of the MCU, heroes, and just superheroes in general, Zachary Levi, who I can't wait to watch in the Shazam sequel, he had a brief role in the MCU and was part of that Heroes Reborn miniseries, has a brief cameo as himself here too. Also, apparently, fun actor fact, he is playing Kurt Warner in a movie soon, so that is something. Off the bat, this movie gives me not Scream vibes, but you feel the tendrils of that franchise in the 2018 film. A kid who loves horror movies, something traumatic happened to his mom while they're watching one Halloween night, and his dad saves him. The trauma from this event, we love talking about trauma on this podcast, impacts these two men very differently and is super interesting, almost like a fun case study, even though obviously it's scripted and not real. The dad takes the media causes violence thing to a T and does not want his family to be any part of it or anywhere, especially in horror movies. And the son finds some solace in the fact that movies are fake and their way to escape the harsh reality and violence in the real world, especially because he had that first-hand experience at such a young age. The thought that you find comfort in the back of the ambulance with the final girl, almost a direct quote from the Scream TV series. There is a fun, weird sort of levity here that is in Scream and some of the Friday the 13th. I mean, eyeball popping out in 3D has to mean something as well. But it would not be caught dead in, like, I don't know, the Conjuring films, maybe The Exorcist. I haven't seen them. Not really my cup of tea. We'll see about those Exorcist films. The Conjuring feels not for me. I actually think this is pretty funny and poignant movie, especially with the setup. And the way they throw out rules of horror just around and make a ton of pop culture references. This is my cup of, dare I say, Vita Coco. Please sponsor me, Vita Coco. Anyway, these two leads do kind of remind me of that Peter Parker-Ned friendship. And while Tom Holland is sensational Spider-Man, I don't think anyone would question that. I feel like Robbie Kay would have done a great job to boot. Also, you have to wonder if all the red balloons coming from the fest are a reference to It. I know I've seen him recently for like the second, third time. Maybe I'm just thinking about It a lot, who knows. But red balloons for me is synonymous with It. And if it's a horror movie making references, that you would think that leans into something. There are clearly enough Jason, Hannibal, and more references to make the best of horror fans, I don't know if excited is the right word, but give the kind of that aha appreciation. The themes and tropes from the last Frightful Fest film are here too, but somehow the setup, it just feels a little more organic. The dentist office one. Like, what is that? I would rather have zombie, vampire, and axe-wielding masked people than a taxidermist and a dentist. And having the park doors locked as part of the gimmick, it makes sense here, especially because everyone's in on the joke. You really have all these horror fans locked in the middle of nowhere, like a light-hearted and more violent Hunger Games setup, especially with it all being filmed to some sort of movie director's twisted vision. The movie in the movie thing, it's a hoot. But when watching this movie and the director's editing and direction style of the scenes going on, there is no world where the movie inside this movie would ever make sense or be a good movie. It would be an awful movie. There's no world there would be any coherent story structure. Chalk that up to my script writing minor from Ithaca College. But all the crazy groups of different killers in this movie, it feels like the end of Cabin in the Woods, with all the scares in the world just meshing together for a chaotic, dare I say, monster mash. Has there ever been a more iconic Halloween tune? I am sure the debate will rage on for eons, asking if the Monster Mash or the Ghostbusters theme song is better and the quintessential Halloween party jam. If you have another one, let me know on social, Knick-Knack Movies or Knick-Knack IC. I would love to know what this other third song could be that could dethrone those two at the top. The beginning of this movie has a fun keynote speech that almost immediately devolves into a locked-in masked murder spree. For the most part, the special effects are pretty good. Some of the blood splatter and body parts things just aren't good, but for the most part, it's good enough. But once Bloodfest gets into listing the rules, talking about fake-out jump scares to actually have one right after, to cell phone signals dying being cliche in and of itself, and the errors of investigating a strange noise, I love it all. It really makes me want to rewatch the film series and show for Scream, especially to get ready for the new Scream film with most of our original fan favorites packed in and back at it again. And Jack Quaid is there, coming off his success in The Boys, also on Amazon Prime. I can't wait for season 3 of that. Gosh, the fun they have of having someone yell about a scary thing not happening, then waiting for the repercussion of that, like in the movies, then it happening right after. What a rush. They do actually have a pretty good job at good job in quotes, for the movie itself. Look, it is a scary movie, murder fest. It's unrealistic, but they do a pretty good job at trying to explain how it exists in the movies. You know, it doesn't make real world sense. It never will. But it makes sense enough here. Yes, the zombies are dead people, not zombies, but they're dead people using electrodes to make them move around, and they're controlled by some video gamers who have no idea that they're playing not a game but real life. Side note, having Zachary Levi as himself, not talking about his Flynn Rider Tangled role and talking about the horrors he went through and having the wannabe actress with just keep mentioning Tangled. I mean, and then he dies soon after. Beautiful. This movie is not dumb in the same way that Funhouse Massacre is. In some moments, they're actually kind of nice. The whole arc of our main character, Dax, meeting his favorite horror actor, Roger Hinckley. He goes from hating the movies he was in, showing his cowardice, classic movie trope of the genre, to have someone get too scared and ruin the things for the group, to slowly bonding with his number one fan, getting to act out a dramatic role and be his actor self, not just a slasher movie actor, as the father of his horror character, showing his amazing chops in the process, and just serving as a father figure who has a bit of interest in horror that Dax's father never would, all before sacrificing himself to save some kids he barely knew. It's a fun, albeit a little rushed, but overall very fulfilling arc. Also, one more actor fun fact, his dad is played by Tate Donovan, who I didn't know who that was, but that's the voice of the animated Hercules from one of my favorite Disney movies of all time. Great music, and I knew there was something I recognized about him, and I couldn't figure out what it was, because I definitely didn't recognize him by look, but once I've read it and saw it, I was like, okay, I get it. That's the I can go the distance, all that. Zero to hero, all that. Oh, so good. There's also a pretty funny subplot about Dax's best friend Krill trying to lose his virginity, something that is a big no-no in the genre. He almost falls prey to the way they explain the vampires is something to behold. That's also far-fetched, but they try their best, to this vampire lady. At first, it looks like he's going to be a goner, but his virginity and innocence saves him. And his whole arc is finding that special someone until it all happens on a whim and his non-virgin self ends up back with that vampire. And unfortunately, he can't make it through if he's not a virgin. Those are the rules, after all. Side note, I've said it once and I'll say it again. I don't love anything Saw related, and that torture trap homage scene, not my bag. But I do love, something that is my bag, is Dax's explanation of how horror movies helped him cope with trauma. Knowing at the end of it all, it's all fake. When the lights come back on, everything is still okay. And there are some nice messages about death being all around you, which isn't nice in of itself, but trying to make the most of your life while you're living it. Damn, we are back to deep therapy lessons here on the Horror Podcast, giving you your dose of deep life chats. Health and wellness charts on the Apple Podcast, here we come. I have said it before, the combination of genres only marginally works sometimes, especially if that is a huge part of your movies. This movie has clowns combining with zombies on accident. Although that does feel like it could kind of work. I'm sure there's a clown zombie movie or many out there. But just like that amazing Cabin in the Woods end, and yes, a not so subtle Jurassic Park Life Finds a Way line, always appreciated. It works here because it feels like it's about something falling apart. If nothing else, the biggest surprise end of Dax's dad and sister being a part of the Hellfest, not of itself murder thing, but as kind of a setup. They have their own agenda. His dad's whole setup of making the horror fest a true tragedy and use it to galvanize the media to stop making horror movies. It's a pretty funny, unique enough setting for a setup. The Scream movies do play with media and horror movies' roles in media, obviously with a lot of pop culture references and trying to use that as a get out of jail free card of saying the media made me do it. It's the whole thing, and there's many similarities to these. No doubt Scream is better than these, but the similarities are for sure there. Using media to stop another form of media it's something that it's always just a little bit relevant. Seeing the master plan of one guy using the real-life horrors to make a horror movie and the other to end it, it's just fun. Not sure how much I love the end with his dad dying, the movie guy seemingly dying. We won't talk about the dumb post-credit thing of his hand coming off from the rubble. And his sister, who's become numb to all the killing, pops off the roof, kills the dad, and comes back in the sequel. If there was a sequel, which there won't be. I mean, we don't actually really get in a whole lot of exploration of her trauma, which is becoming so numb to it they don't feel anything anymore, which is, once again, very interesting. We just don't get a whole lot of time spent with her, at least knowingly, because she is the mass killer introduced very early on. In general, I do quite like this movie, more than I ever could have expected to. And its quirky, fun take on horror, and the genre as a whole, it's just a fun romp. Up next, the finale of the 3, Hellfest on Netflix. It's actually wild that Bloodfest and Hellfest came out in the same year. And while different, ton of similarities. Just look at the name. Much like when Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down both came out in 2013, you sometimes forgot which one was which unless you're a diehard fan of one or the other. Here I think you can like and appreciate both Fest films, but know what you're getting here is much more of an atypical stalker slasher movie that has charm and fun to some degree, but very much goes in a different direction with the assignment and goes much harder on scares and gore and less meta-analysis or subversive genre fare without attempting to explain zombies and vampires existing in their world without actually existing. Hellfest doesn't have a ton of name brand actors. Most have Hellfest as one of the most known movies or projects they are known for. I am sure you will recognize one of these people from your previous watching history. For me, it was Bex Taylor Klaus from Arrow, The Killing, and my favorite thing to watch on Netflix, Scream the TV series. This was actually the first of the 3 of these I saw, and it reminded me a ton of booking my way through the haunted house at Universal in Burbank. Gosh, those Cali days. What a rush. It feels like another lifetime ago. But the biggest fear of all these is probably going to one of these horror fests, being scared, then something actually happening and not knowing what's real and what is fake. That is a question that all these movies ask, and it's a super niche genre or subgenre. You won't know it's real unless it's happening to you. Then you'll for sure know that it's probably happening and is real. Yes, this stuff is explored in our last film, Bloodfest. But instead of making a really deep story with major ties to our killer and our victim, this is a bit more random and impersonal. A killer is gonna kill, run around the park, leaving dead bodies everywhere, and remain mostly anonymous throughout the evening, just like Among Us. This is where I like the setup a ton. Hiding dead bodies as part of the scenery to the park. The same issue of eventually recognizing them all if it's done enough. And if you are a big-ass group that doesn't split up, nothing bad will happen, obviously. But being a spooky movie, drinking and sex and many other distractions exist to break up our group of teens. Very much classic slasher that could have been made in the 80s or 90s. There's nothing wrong with being random or a bit more generic. Those movies are still fun, and your big bad mass killer doesn't need to be the second cousins, twice removed related to the final girl of our tale. It can just be some random guy walking around a scary park in a scary generic mass killing because, well, I guess that's what he or she or they or do, whatever, right? Also, while not a main character, they somehow always find a way to get Tony Todd into more and more scary movies and projects. The original Candyman from 1992 was in the Final Destination franchise, Scream the TV series, and he will reprise his Candyman role in the 2021 spiritual successor. Phenomenal voice, especially for the genre. But to this movie, unlike some large group plot, a ton of people are just actors. You aren't locked in here or anything. A ton of the people will and do make it out alive. There's only one average person killer. This ain't the Terminator, so most people are gonna make it through the night. If only they follow those rules. No sex, no drinking or drugs, and don't say, "I'll be right back," or ask, "Who's there? Is anyone there?" All those death sentences in the genre. It is random to a degree, but I will say, I noticed the second time watching this, our killer's MO has something to do with targeting, scaring, or killing those who don't seem to be actually scared by the horror fest they're at. So I thought that was an interesting secondary thing I discovered while watching it the second time. I will always wonder why people are so relaxed in these movies, seeing the killing and assuming it's part of the actor show. Like, if someone is alive in front of me, going up on stage or doing whatever, and then they aren't, and if it looks too real, it might be too real. I'm not saying scream or whatever. Like, just leave. Get out. Get out. Like, that seems to be the move. Our cast of teens is fine and all, but they're just a bit too generic, minus Bex, who has fun, cool, unique hair and plays the same horror fan you've come to expect. Same as in Scream. Otherwise, everyone is a bit too generic, which, while not bad, even the generic Friday the 13th and Halloween movies have some super memorable, even if they are one-dimensional, briefly mentioned, or just flat archetypes, such as Mitch the Stoner, and who could forget the amazing dance moves of Crispin Glover, and at one time Kevin Bacon was in the first one. If you have never seen or didn't know that, check out ASAP, you'll be surprised. While a ton of the kills are nothing wild and don't play too well with the fun settings they have, using a test your strength game mallet to ring the bell and their bell on someone's skull, classic amusement park moment. That was a hoot. Sadly, this is like one of the first kills you see, and it's the first of our group to get off, so, it kind of drops from there a little bit. There is a eye syringe scene. When they had one of those in Scream, the TV series too, they have those a lot. I don't like needles and eyes. That's one, I don't need it. We don't need it. We don't need that one. That's a gross one. Not about it. While this isn't the funniest or scariest or most clever movie, one moment I thought was amazing was our lead was stuck in a spooky version of the Tunnel of Love by herself, and the stalker was there, and you never know what's going to happen, and you don't see her for a bit, and you see them come out on the train, and it's her, the stalker's on her trolley car thing, and you think it's like, oh, what's going on here? Or compromised situation, calling the act in the public eye. It looks not great. The whole mask and costume is pretty simple enough, though, and guess what? 4 or 5 more people come out with the same mask, and it's not the following setup where they're all masked killers. It's just the guys hiding among 4 or 5 people. Maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't that exact moment, but either way. Matching other park employees, the killer really planned this whole thing out. Not the who is being killed, but at least the logistics are on point. I guess the one big thing they had to add was a version of this talking to the cops, in this case security, saying something is wrong but not being believed, since it's Halloween or something else that would lead to this kind of thing existing, some scary setup that, oh, that's just what it is. But the most memorable scene has to be the guillotine scene, with Bex in the scary predicament. It starts with a big fake scare scene, wondering if the guillotine was real. They recognize the killer's boots. They think, this isn't going what we think it's going to go. It's going to be a big issue. Get out of there. It wasn't. We'd see the fake head pop out, following up by it being totally real. And after one swing, they fake us out, the viewers again, thinking that's the killing blow. It's not, because in olden times, they said with guillotines, it was normally not shing, like they gone, head popped out, fade to black. Normally took a couple of the up downs to be done with it, and that is definitely in play here. While it would have been nice to see that as part of the final turn to chaos in the park, there's something fun about running around asking for help, which is something they joked about, when others did it, assuming this was just make-believe and part of the theater of the park. It wasn't. Unfortunately, from here it drags on a bit as they kill 2 people off really quickly. Feels like the setup of fun kill goes right down the drain, and it becomes a bit more of a generic stalking of a person stalking 2 people through a horror maze. It's fine, just a bit generic. It goes how you'd expect. Looks like it's going to be close. There's a fake out moment. The tables are turned on the killer. They're left there. They turn around. The killer's gone. The cops come in too late. It's everything you expect it to be, except 2 people survive instead of 1. But the killer's still alive in the end, and they're left for dead, but they're not dead. Back for the sequel, if there was a sequel. There's not. Classic. But the post-credit end fake-out moment is, while not particularly explaining anything, it's fun post-development we get. The killer comes to this house, has a ton of masks and souvenirs from Killfest, so clearly this has been going on a bit. They get home scot-free. Not the first rodeo, apparently. But the wildest part has to be that you see this young girl sleeping on the couch. She wakes up and she's like, "Oh, Dad." And it's like, whoa. The killer had a daughter. And she's like, "Oh, what'd you bring me?" And, he gets her some fun stuffed animal. And I guess that's his, trip. Like, you go on a business trip, you bring back a little tchotchke. And this is the little tchotchke. But instead of going on a business trip, it just goes to murder some people. It makes you say, like, what? It's neat, not some groundbreaking thing. A lot of questions. Does the daughter know that he kills people? Is the daughter being raised to be like a family kill team thing? Like, there's so many questions I have. But they're never going to be answered in this podcast or that movie or anywhere else. So let's move on to the Knick Knack movies list. I feel like it's pretty obvious, especially number 3 for ranking carnival horror movies that I've seen and know of. Funhouse Massacre, just too weird. Parts of it were fine, parts of it were haha funny, but not a good movie. A lot of stupid moments to get to the good moments, and not in a good, stupid way. Not like Sharknado stupid. Of the 2 Fest movies, which is going to come out on top? I actually liked Hellfest as well as Bloodfest. I didn't say it, but I liked them both. I think Hellfest is a little more generic. The setting is really cool. It just becomes your standard guy running around killing people, and that's the movie. And it's fun in the park, and Bex Taylor Klaus is awesome, but it's just okay compared to the wild film we got in Bloodfest. If you're going to watch one of these, for me, Bloodfest, no doubt. It's super quirky. It has some actors you'll know from other things, Zachary Levi for a hot second. It's just a fun, weird, different movie. And yes, it has some Scream things. And if you saw Hellfest before Bloodfest, you'll say, oh, it's another carnival killer movie. Yes. But it's very different, and the way it plays with, like, not taking itself even remotely seriously, it's just fun. Like, it's not the deepest movie, but there are deep moments to it, so you can kind of turn your brain off, but in watching it, you might come away with some fun health and wellness tips, in a nice way that I like to think I look at the horror genre myself, of having some merit to it in my health and wellness. So take a dose of Bloodfest and call me in the morning, I guess, right? This was a bit of a less timely episode, especially with some of the superhero ones before, with WandaVision and the Snyder Cut. But when I saw a few of these and found out this was a fairly existing subgenre of movies, I felt like I had to get an episode out there. I knew it was calling to me. But let me know what you think, if you've seen any of these scary movies, or if you've seen one I haven't mentioned taking place at a carnival. If I haven't touched on it yet, let me know so I can watch and see how it stacks up to these 3. Hit me up on social, either Knick Knack Movies or knickknack_IC on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. I swear I'm going to get back to doing some TikTok soon at some point. Just been a really busy few weeks. Well, that's all for me, so cheers, and until next time, cinephiles. Are you not entertained? I think this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't like goodbyes. Let's just call this, see you later, alligator.